absolutely support defunding Seattle Police Department by 50%.
I do not support defunding the police.
Nikita for 9! Nikita for 9!
Activist and attorney Nikita Oliver is fired up to bring their progressive agenda to City Hall in a tight citywide race for the Seattle City Council.
There is hope for the city.
Small business owner and former council aide Sara Nelson has a more centrist approach to deal with the city's challenges exacerbated by the COVID pandemic.
This council has demonstrated an utter failure to spend their existing resources wisely.
It's a battle of ideas for the future of Seattle.
I propose that we build housing, that we move towards more progressive revenue generation.
The citywide race for Seattle City Council Position 9. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. If you're ready for a change on the Seattle City Council, both candidates in the Position 9 race say they have something to offer. Nikita Oliver, an activist and attorney, narrowly won the August primary on a platform of defunding the police and finding new progressive revenue to deal with homelessness and affordable housing. Sara Nelson, co-founder of Fremont Brewing and former council aide, says she'll bring pragmatism and accountability to the council if elected and help small businesses. Two starkly different candidates who've run for local office before are back at it in 2021, both promising a new and better future for the city of Seattle.
There might be some good news next week.
Nikita Oliver is a community organizer who says their campaign for Seattle City Council Position 9 is about representing those in need.
This is about service to our communities, especially those that are suffering most.
With council member Lorena Gonzlez seeking the mayor's job, the citywide Position 9 race attracted 7 candidates. Oliver rose to the top in the primary with just over 40% of the vote. Oliver uses the pronouns they and them, and they've raised more than $392,000 for their campaign as of late September. Oliver, who came in third in Seattle's 2017 mayoral primary, is endorsed by the MLK Labor Council, Sierra Club Seattle, Seattle City Council members Teresa Mosqueda and Tammy Morales, and U.S. Representative Pramila Jayapal.
My number one agenda item will be addressing housing and homelessness.
Oliver says they'll push for more short-term shelter options, like hotels or tiny house villages, and work long-term to build more green, affordable housing using new progressive revenue sources like a wealth tax.
So making those big investments, because the health of our communities, the safety of our communities is really dependent upon us getting to the root causes of the housing affordability crisis.
Oliver is also a police abolitionist who wants to make deeper cuts to the SPD budget.
I absolutely support defunding Seattle Police Department by 50%.
911, what are you reporting?
They want to invest in more crisis response options like mental health and social services. After a decade of increasing the SPD budget by nearly $200 million without a significant decrease in crime.
Which means that rather than investing in an ineffective model, we should take that $200 million and invest in models that we know sociologically and based on data actually work.
On the economy, Oliver is proposing rent control on commercial properties, reparation payments to Black residents, and other programs to close the wealth gap faced by people of color.
We're going to need to make huge investments in transforming inequitable systems and building pipelines into opportunity and thriving that every child in the city of Seattle deserves.
I am running a change campaign.
Sara Nelson also wants to transform Seattle, but with a focus on building what she calls more pragmatic, accountable city leadership.
I represent change, not the same old status quo of sort of ideological rhetoric, but no plan for these things.
Nelson, co-founder of Fremont Brewing, came in second in the August primary with more than 39% of the vote and has raised more than $369,000 for her campaign. Nelson, who finished third in a 2017 council race, is endorsed by former Governor Gary Locke, Reverend Harriet Walden, founder of Mothers for Police Accountability, the Seattle Times, and the IAFF Local 27 Seattle Firefighters Union.
I know how local government works.
A former legislative aide to Councilmember Richard Conlon, Nelson says she'll approach the issue of homelessness by ending the city's current system of unregulated encampments and finding solutions that have a proven track record.
It's not rocket science. There are other cities that are responding to their homelessness crisis better. And what we need to do is follow best practices of other cities that have had success.
On the topic of police funding and public safety, Nelson presents a stark contrast to Nikita Oliver.
I do not support defunding the police. My opponent wants to abolish the police.
Nelson says she's in favor of bringing officer staffing levels back up, responding seriously to crime, and reforming the police department to keep communities safe.
And we've got a lot of work to do with the attrition of officers, but I believe that we can build up the force, reform the police, and rebuild trust between community and law enforcement.
When it comes to helping the Seattle economy recover from the COVID crisis, Nelson says she'll help small businesses and revive the downtown core by tackling homelessness, improving streetscapes, and cleaning up crime.
A lot of that falls under the rubric of an equitable economic recovery. So if we can start making progress on all those pieces, then I believe that we can emerge from this pandemic a better city.
It's a pragmatist and a progressive facing off for Seattle City Council Position 9, both promising a different future for our city.
The opportunity to bring that organizing, the community that I partner with, and to City Hall is an opportunity to actually see democracy be what we say that it is.
My top agenda item is to set a new tone, that we're going to be a council that solves problems.
And here they are, both the candidates for City Council Position 9. We have with us Nikita Oliver and Sara Nelson. Thank you both for joining us here. And I'll start with you, Sara. We had a coin flip before the program. You'll be speaking first. Tell us why you're running for the council's citywide Position 9 seat and what qualifies you for the job.
All right. Well, thanks, Brian, for this opportunity. So Seattle's charter states that municipal government's primary responsibility is protecting and enhancing the health, safety, environment, and general welfare of the people. I'm running because that's not happening. The extremist policies of the current city council just aren't working, and especially for our most vulnerable. Public frustration with the state of our city is at an all-time high, and the people of Seattle want change, and I'm the change candidate. I will be the city council member who's responsive to the incredible diversity of constituent opinion across this city. And what I'm hearing is that what people really want is to feel safe in their homes, their neighborhoods, their workplaces, and they want to be able to send their kids to the park. They want jobs, and ultimately they want the opportunity to build a better future for themselves and their families. So I would say that city council needs to stop yelling and have the humility to really listen. We must address the root causes of inequity, but we can't lose sight of the very real potential to make a real difference in the lives of people living real lives. And I'm talking about pragmatic, progressive solutions, and that's the change that I will bring.
Thank you very much for that. Nikita Oliver, an opening statement from you, please.
Yes, thank you so much for having us, Brian. My name is Nikita Oliver. I use they, them pronouns. I am an attorney, executive director, adjunct professor at Seattle University School of Law, community organizer, and a writer. I am a full-time working candidate. I am a renter living in the Rainier Beach neighborhood. And I'm running for Seattle City Council because our city is facing extreme compounding crises. And we can no longer delay on effectively responding to those crises with solutions that are commensurate with the needs that are in front of us. For many years, I have done public safety and restorative justice work through a public health lens that prioritizes stopping the root causes of harm, healing the harm that has occurred, and ensuring that everyone involved can move forward in a thriving position. Our city is facing a housing crisis. We are facing a climate catastrophe, and we are in the midst of still a pandemic and a huge public health crisis that needs to be addressed both with economic and public health tools. I propose that we build housing, that we move towards more progressive revenue generation and turn our upside down tax code right side up, and that we do the work necessary to address the climate catastrophe through transportation for all and ending exclusionary zoning. These are solutions that are well within our toolkit. They are pragmatic, and I am the candidate willing to make that happen.
Thank you for those opening statements there. I want to talk about a big issue for so many voters here, and that's homelessness. Sarah, I'll start with you. You've talked about learning about best practices from other cities to help solve this crisis, also about ensuring that our public areas are clear of encampments. Tell us how you're going to deliver on these campaign pledges and how you're going to pay for them, because Seattle and dozens of large cities have been spending billions in wrestling with this for decades. Your thoughts?
Well, it's clear that we need to stop doing what we're doing right now because it's not working. And yes, I have spoken about best practices. And what I've learned works in San Francisco and other cities is individualized case management, coordination amongst service providers, actual peer navigators that have lived experience with homelessness that will do the outreach, and these people should be paid staff. And ultimately, we signed an MOU with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. So we will be expected to implement their plan. And that's a good thing. I trust them and I understand a little bit about what they're going to be trying to do. But ultimately, we cannot just accept encampments as a permanent solution, because this debate about sweeps or no sweeps is a smokescreen for doing nothing. This is inhumane for the people that are living there. We've got to restore our parks and open places for their intended use. And a huge missing piece of this whole response is behavioral health dollars. We do not have enough, we don't have a city funding stream for that. And I do believe that that should be our focus. When those resources go to the county for their response, we should focus the remaining dollars that we have, Seattle, in our control, to prioritize substance abuse and mental health illness treatment.
Thank you very much for that. Nikita, I'll talk to you about this. You've talked about looking for new sources of revenue and investing in a number of solutions to homelessness: tiny house villages, hotels, affordable housing. Talk about your plans, how you'd pay for them, and also please talk about your position on clearing public spaces of encampments, because I believe you have a different stance on that than Sarah.
Yes, thank you so much. You know, what sweeps do is they push the problem around the city. And as a city, as a region, we have failed to respond to the root need in this housing crisis, which is providing housing. And we need to be actively building green, social, affordable housing. We need to be actively participating in the acquisition of buildings, and we need to be preserving our current supply of affordable units. And progressive revenue generation is going to be a key part of that. We are fortunate that the Jumpstart tax has passed legal muster, and we are currently raising about $200 million per year with that tax, spending a little over $100 million specifically on things related to housing and homelessness. We can increase the Jumpstart tax, a tax that my opponent actually opposed when it was initially proposed. I think at one point even throwing a party when the head tax first was repealed. I think it is significant that we take not only significantly different approaches around sweeps and providing social services and care to our loved ones that are living outside, but that I'm also proposing we take the advice of the Progressive Revenue Task Force, which identified no less than 7 taxes that we could put in place and direct them towards housing and services. Additionally, I also believe that we need to increase our behavioral health support. We are woefully dependent upon the King County public health system, which is also dependent upon regressive taxes. And we could utilize one of our progressive revenue generating options to develop and fund our own behavioral health system at the city level that would not just benefit our residents without homes who, once they get stabilized and homes can access those services, but it would benefit the whole of our city to have a behavioral health system for us.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Sarah, I feel like there's a comment in there regarding progressive revenue that Nikita made. Would you like to respond to it?
Yes, before we talk about new sources of progressive revenue, we need to talk about results. This council has demonstrated an utter failure to spend their existing resources wisely. We've got COVID relief funds that have come in already. We will have infrastructure dollars from the feds for housing production, and we do have the Jumpstart tax. You don't make public policy by simply saying we need more money. You start with data. We need to know exactly how, what is the landscape of people living unsheltered really like? How many people are living in tents versus cars with their kids? Develop data, develop a plan, and then figure out how to implement it. You don't start out by saying we need more money, because I'm concerned that this council will always say there isn't enough and we need to get in line and partner with our regional partnership, which will be getting resources from other cities in the region because this is a regional problem.
Okay. Nikita, is there any quick rejoinder you wanted to make to that? There's some good back and forth here, please.
Yes, I think we have a considerable amount of data, and Mark Jones themselves has actually said that the root of the housing and homelessness crisis is economic, and our regressive tax system places the brunt of solving a crisis that the most impacted community is already paying the most for. Progressive revenue generation is not just about getting us out of the housing and homelessness crisis. It is also about preventing anyone else from falling into that same crisis, understanding that we need both upstream and downstream solutions in order to get to a place to address the state of emergency that we've been in since 2015.
Okay. All right.
One final thing.
Okay.
I
Briefly,
think that
please.
it's simplistic and naive, and it's an insult to people's intelligence to say it's only about affordable housing and lack thereof. We need to be honest and say that mental illness and addiction are big parts of this. And encampments, by refusing to do anything, worsen the problem.
Okay.
And so homelessness is a complex issue, and it's not just one thing that is driving the increasing numbers of people living in shelters and cycling even deeper into chronic homelessness.
Okay. I want to try to move on if I could here. And Nikita, I want to direct this next question to you because I want to stay on the topic of housing and talk about zoning specifically. The Seattle City Council right now is working on a measure to change the name of single family zoning to neighborhood residential. I want to get your thoughts on what that name change means and how you'd like to guide the comprehensive plan process, the plan for urban growth in our city if you're elected.
I am incredibly excited about the opportunity to contribute to our 2024 comprehensive plan. I think it's worth noting that our first comprehensive plan went into place in 1923, and a man by the name of Harlan Bartholomew, a nationally known segregationist, contributed to deciding how our neighborhoods were demarcated. And as a result, that has actually perpetuated and exacerbated things like the racial wealth gap. It has made it very challenging for us to have enough density to build the multi-family, multi-types of housing that we need throughout our entire city, not just in urban villages, in order to meet the 244,000 units of housing that we need by 2030, not just in Seattle, but in the region as a whole. So I wholly support ending exclusionary zoning, not just for the purpose of building various types of duplexes and quadplexes and having a successful infill strategy, but also for the purpose of being able to build multi-family units, larger apartment buildings that have apartments that have 3 or 4 bedrooms, because we need workforce housing for families who want to be able to live in deeply affordable housing here within the city. And that's going to require every part of the city, excluding our industrial lands, be willing to take on density.
Thank you for that. Sarah, I'll direct a similar question to you. If you are elected, how do you want to shape the comprehensive plan and urban growth in our city? What's your take on changing the name of single family zoning to neighborhood residential?
I think changing a name is great, but I have not seen the policy proposals that are actually going to be written into the code to make that change. Essentially, we ended single family zoning when we passed the ADU legislation. So each lot does have the ability to have 3 units on it. I do think that we need to follow Portland's residential infill project, which allows for more units and 6, up to 6 if 2 of those are affordable. So that is great. Yes, triplexes and duplexes on corners and all these things. I'm endorsed by Alan Durning of Sightline Institute because I'm focused on density. What we need to do, because we're not going to be able to subsidize our way out of our housing crisis, is to look at what barriers exist in our land use code and our building code that is keeping more housing produced in the low-rise zones where it makes most sense. And so I will be looking at overcoming those barriers so that we can have a greater diversity of housing, not just in single family zones, but elsewhere. And I'll say one more thing.
Okay.
A blanket solution, a blanket end single family zoning, because nobody's really defined that. What does that mean? Getting rid of all zoning restrictions, height restrictions everywhere? No one has really made that explicit. And I'm concerned about people in areas, neighborhoods like the Central District that are undergoing rapid displacement. And what do those Black homeowners whose only asset is their home,
Okay.
what do they think? So we need to start listening to the people in neighborhoods that will be most impacted by whatever changes we make.
Nikita, I'd love for you to weigh in on that because I thought I heard something there that you might be able to respond to when it came to Black homeowners in our area. Some thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's significant that the upzones that we've seen in relationship to HALA and the mandatory housing affordability has actually deeply impacted mostly neighborhoods like the Central District and Rainier Beach, where Black homeowners are actively being displaced and gentrified out. So, in order to prevent that displacement, it is actually very key. It is a key component for more of the city to be willing to take on that density rather than continuing to pile it on in the same areas that historically Black neighborhoods where we have actually already experienced multiple waves of gentrification. I think simultaneously, when ending exclusionary zoning, a huge part of the Comprehensive Plan 2024 has to be in putting in place anti-displacement, anti-gentrification policies, knowing that the private market would stand most to benefit from an end to exclusionary zoning if we are not careful about protecting neighborhoods where Black, Indigenous people of color are currently living.
Thank you very much for that, Nikita. I want to stay with you and talk about police and public safety. You've talked about defunding or even abolishing the police department and investing in more community-based solutions. But in some areas like Chinatown ID, people are calling for more officers, even talking about hiring private security to deal with crime there. Explain what defunding the police means to you. And also, what do you say to neighborhoods who want more of a police presence?
I think it's really important to talk about defunding the police while coupled with the things that we're building up. A divestment and investment strategy cannot be isolated from the infrastructure, the public health and public safety infrastructure that is needed. To think about this in the context of who calls 911, about 80% of the calls that come in are ones that are not attached to a criminal law violation. They're often categorized as non-criminal, and 50% of them according to data that the city has had 3 years of 911 call data, 50% of them actually need a response that is not an armed police officer to some other type of first responder. So I think what is key is that we do the work of building up things like Health One and our de-escalation responses, our supports for folks when they are dealing with property issues that actually respond to the immediate need that is in front of someone in crisis, rather than providing them with an officer who often does not have the right skills to deal both with the immediate crisis and the long-term care that a person in crisis needs. So what we're really talking about is that the $410 million budget that SPD had in 2020, using a portion of it to build out community-based responses that decrease the need for an armed officer.
Okay, thank you for that. And Sara, I'll make sure I talk to you on this one too. You have said you do not support defunding the police, but we have seen studies in Seattle saying, and Nikita was just talking about this, at least half the calls to 911 don't need a response from an armed officer. So considering that, wouldn't it make sense to reduce the number of sworn officers we have on the street and look to some different places to spend money on public safety?
There is, I don't believe, any disagreement that the officers are responding to calls that they're not equipped to deal with, and that we do need to add capacity to a social service response to people in crisis. That's not an argument. So I don't know why that keeps being brought up. But we heard Chief Diaz say that he needs more staffing to deal with high response calls when those shootings went down in July. Multiple shooting incidents are high response calls. And it's not just the people that are responding to 911 calls. We're talking about community policing teams that are cut. We're talking about investigators who are investigating where these guns are coming from, and domestic violence cases. And so I believe that, yes, we need to amplify those other services, but taking that money from the police department when they've lost 300 officers, and we need to retain our diverse officer corps that was last hired, is the wrong way to go. And when I'm talking to people that are living in areas that are impacted by crime, there is a diversity of opinion about policing. And most of the people that have endorsed me have said that they want better policing, not no policing. I believe reforms can work. My opponent says reforms do not work. And I think that we can have reform that holds officers accountable, yet maintains public safety.
Nikita, I heard your name there. Any rejoinder that you wanted to make here?
Yeah, I think it's very significant that we have been in a consent decree for nearly 7 years, and we continue to see a significant problem with Seattle Police Department. It is a 10, 20, 30, 40-year-old struggle, knowing that policing is an ineffective model of public safety. And I just want to draw some attention. Folks keep talking about the defund as if it was considerable to Seattle Police Department, or that upticks in gun violence are isolated only to Seattle. The upticks in gun violence are happening nationally. And really, the defund to Seattle Police Department was civilianizing 911 and moving parking enforcement to Seattle Department of Transportation, which was nearly 11% of the budget. It's not the serious crisis of cutting officers' jobs that I think the media and my opponent makes it sound like. I think it's also relevant to acknowledge that nearly 200 officers said they don't want to get vaccinated, and that is a reason why they would leave the department, which has absolutely nothing to do with the defund movement.
Wow. Okay.
I
so much.
do
Please,
have to say
briefly, Sarah, we need to close this up, but go ahead.
The things that I've been reading is that they're leaving because they were concerned about their job security, and the call to defund by 50% was a blow. So if you have to support a family, that will make that will make a difference in choosing to stay in the police force. And my opponent has said that increased violence has nothing to do with numbers of police. And we really do have to examine what's really going on and listen to the people that are involved on the front lines.
Thank you for that. We need to wrap up the show here. And Sarah, it's time for a closing statement. I can give you 30 seconds.
Well, Seattle's at a turning point, and the stakes are high in this election, and the contrast in this race is clear. Voters have a choice between a candidate promoting the kind of ideological rhetoric and failed policies that have produced the state of dysfunction we're in now, or a candidate with pragmatic, progressive policies to make Seattle a safe and livable city for everyone. And I believe in Seattle. I know we can do better, and change starts by electing a candidate you can hold accountable for delivering measurable results to get our city back on track.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Nikita, you get the last word.
I have been working on the front lines of the crises that are facing our city as a case manager, as an educator, and as an executive director. I know firsthand how the policies of the city council are not unfolding on the front lines in a way that changes the conditions that our most marginalized and vulnerable residents are in. Because I'm committed to things like workforce development, housing for all, transportation for all, and developing a public safety system that works for everyone. I'm endorsed by folks like the MLK Labor Council, Protect 17, which represents many of our city workers, and our Seattle Education Association, our educators, for our city, because I am the candidate who is committed to change and building communities where everyone can thrive.
All right, thank you both very much for this, and we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about the Position 9 race for the Seattle City Council? One writes, "We currently have no black members on City Council. Our best chance is Nikita Oliver winning their citywide seat this fall." Another comments, "Vote for Sara Nelson. We need real leadership in Seattle, not the same failed policies." We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next week, the race for Seattle City Attorney. Lawyers Nicole Thomas Kennedy and Ann Davison beat out incumbent Pete Holmes in the August primary, and both present very different ideas on public safety, policing, and tackling the homelessness crisis. Hear them debate right here on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.